Good morning. My name is Sam Williams, and I have the honor of interviewing you. Could you begin by stating your full name and sort of your affiliation with the Coolidge Foundation?
Sure. Christopher Coolidge Jeter, current trustee of the Coolidge Foundation, as well as great-grandson to the president.
I've been beginning a lot of these interviews by asking people what first drew them to Coolidge. That answer might be a bit obvious here. So perhaps around what age did it occur to you how special that was to have that legacy to turn to personally, not just as an American?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. I guess I would answer it as it was sort of an evolution or evolving process, because of course when you're first born and I'd come up to my parents, of course, would bring me up to Vermont when we'd go up to see my grandparents that would spend some of their time in Plymouth. Certainly not all of it, probably about 4 months or so, maybe 5 months in Plymouth in the summertime, and then a little bit of time around New Year's. Of course, at first it's just a matter of, well, Plymouth is where the grandparents have a vacation home, and that's where we go. But then it sort of evolved from that. I guess I can think back, and I remember when I was, I'm going to guess, maybe 7 or 8 years old, during part of a summer, just for a week or so, or two, that we were up in Vermont vacationing with my grandparents, I actually went over to the homestead, and that time there was a site interpreter from the state at each of the buildings, and knew well the woman that worked in the homestead as the interpreter for the homestead, and there's sort of a booth where you'd first walk in where she would sit, and so I would go over there and help her out, so to speak, just sitting there punching tickets as people would come through, and most of the time people had no idea who I was, and that was just fine. But I would probably say it was probably around those years that I began to fully appreciate and take in the connection and what it would mean, and just the significance of the life of Calvin Coolidge.
Thank you for that answer. That's really fascinating, and obviously not something that a lot of people can say. There are only so many. You were just on a panel. I'm wondering what sort of themes emerged in that panel that may have surprised you about Coolidge, maybe some things that people thought were really important, or sort of through lines that you think are just really important for us today moving forward.
Well, I think it was interesting, not being from the academic world, all of the questions from the audience and the points of the panel on studying the classics, and how certainly that was Coolidge, one of his interests or pleasures was doing that as he was going through his school years, but how that the effect of that and how it carried on through the rest of his life, and using that as a basis, I think was highlighted more today than I had given it much that much thought of. It was certainly a component of his life, but I can see certainly how that was an impactful area of his upbringing.
I can't remember if it was a question or if it just emerged at some point during the panel, but the idea, or sort of the challenge, the task of balancing pure business and profit with this principled character, what's good, and I know you touched on that, and I'm wondering if there's some sort of connection with Coolidge in balancing the budget, not just for the budget book, but because of who has to pay that bill, and maybe what are some broader implications of him being connected with the booming business decade, but still being so grounded in the ideals of what makes America really America, which is not overusing credit cards and doing, all that stuff. I just wonder your
Sure.
comment on that.
Yeah. No, I think the origination of his feelings on that, I'm sure a good portion of them came from seeing how his father handled things, and even prior generations, as far as his father running the general store in town, and being successful at it, yet being very cognizant of his customers, if you will, and not wanting them to see them pay a penny more than they had to for whatever the item was that they were purchasing, and the exchange between his father and the people that came to the store. They weren't just customers coming through the door; they were neighbors and perhaps even relatives. Right. So it's more to the transaction than just the dollars and cents. It's the people exchanging goods and services right. at a personal level. I think was sort of a foundation that impacted Coolidge's views over his lifetime. But certainly, you made me think of a sort of a quote, in which I can't quote precisely, but something to the effect that Coolidge said during, I believe it was his time as president, that every dollar that's paid in taxes is a dollar less that the American people can keep in their pockets and use for themselves. So to be especially mindful of that burden, if you will, that the government places on the people, as far as taxation, and expenditures. And so I'm sure he would be of the mindset where the expenditures of the government are necessary and acceptable to a degree, and those expenditures should be done in the most efficient and expedient way possible to preserve the freedom and the ability for the American people to keep as much in their pocket as they can.
Right. For someone who is in high school, who is looking and learning about Coolidge's legacy, what would you point them to as, this is, if you're to take one thing away from this at your age and stage of life, this is what you should do. This is what you should take away from it.
Well, I guess I would say certainly the pursuit of not only things that you're interested in, that you want to achieve, but perhaps also considering, the sort of using the buzzword of either paying it forward or just thinking of the greater good, and trying to not only find a way to mesh and interweave your own personal interests with those that could, other aspects of life that could benefit other members of society. So whether it's doing volunteer work or other ways to contribute to the greater good, while at the same time achieving and being mindful of your own aspirations, and trying to do something that brings those together, or at least during the course of your life or course of your week or time, whatever the time frame is, balancing those two perspectives.